The flames licked at the soles of Olivia Appleton's boots as she pressed her back against the scorched wooden wall of her father's cabin, the thick black smoke stealing every gasp of air she attempted to claim. Arizona Territory, 1885, the year that was supposed to bring prosperity after her father's passing had instead brought catastrophe on this sweltering August evening, with her trapped inside their homestead as it burned to cinders around her. "Help!" Olivia cried out, her voice barely audible above the roaring inferno that consumed the home she had known since childhood. At 22, she had faced countless hardships in the unforgiving terrain of Butte, Arizona, but none as terrifying as this. The heat was unbearable, causing the pins that held her copper hair in place to sear against her scalp as she frantically searched for an escape. The front door had collapsed in a burning heap minutes ago, and the windows were impassable walls of flame. Smoke stung her eyes as she crumpled to the floor, the hem of her dress already beginning to smolder. Her lungs burned with each ragged breath, and the realization that she might die here alone crashed over her like a wave. Miles away, Vaughn Mitchell urged his stallion forward, the animal's powerful muscles propelling them through the darkening terrain. He had spotted the orange glow from a ridge 3 miles back and recognized it immediately as fire a rancher's worst nightmare in these dry months. As the foreman of the neighboring Triple Creek Ranch, Vaughn knew every homestead within 20 miles, including the modest Appleton place where the old man's daughter had taken up residence after his passing. The smoke billowed into the night sky like a signal, and Vaughn spurred his horse faster, his heart racing with the animal beneath him. As he crested the final hill, the sight of the cabin engulfed in flames sent a chill down his spine despite the intense heat radiating across the distance. "Olivia!" he shouted, leaping from his horse before it had fully stopped. At 28, Vaughn had seen his share of tragedy, from the war back east to the harsh realities of frontier life, but the thought of the spirited young woman trapped inside that inferno made his blood run cold. Inside the burning structure, Olivia's consciousness began to fade. The wooden beams above groaned with the strain of holding the flaming roof, and she knew it was only moments before the entire cabin would collapse upon her. The smoke had become so thick she could no longer see her own hands in front of her face. Vaughn circled the cabin desperately, seeking an entry point. The front door was completely consumed by flames, but a small window at the rear of the structure still showed gaps between the flames. Without hesitation, he stripped off his duster, soaked it in the water trough that had miraculously survived the initial blaze, and wrapped it around his upper body. "Hold on," he shouted, though he had no idea if anyone inside could hear him. Taking a deep breath, Vaughn charged forward, using his protected arm to smash through what remained of the window frame. Glass and burning would cut into his flesh, but he barely noticed as he vaulted into the flaming interior. The heat inside was suffocating, the air so thick with smoke that breathing felt like swallowing fire. Crouching low where the air was marginally clearer, Vaughn scanned the room frantically. "Olivia," he called again, his voice rough from the smoke. A faint sound drew his attention to a corner where a huddled form lay motionless beneath a table. Moving quickly, he reached her side, relief washing over him at finding her still alive, though barely conscious. Vaughn. Olivia's voice was barely a whisper as her eyes fluttered open, meeting the determined gaze of the cowboy kneeling beside her. "I'm getting you out of here," he promised, scooping her into his arms. She was lighter than he expected, her slender form fitting against his chest as if she belonged there. A thunderous crack from above warned of the roof's imminent collapse. Vaughn turned, shielding Olivia with his body as he calculated their escape route. The window he'd entered through was now fully engulfed in flames, leaving only one possibility: they would have to create their own exit. Spotting a weak point in the rear wall where the fire had eaten away at the aging wood, Vaughn backed up several paces. "Hold tight," he murmured into Olivia's hair as she curled her fingers weakly into his shirt. With a powerful surge forward, he drove his shoulder into the burning wall. The wood splintered, sending them both tumbling into the relative safety of the night air outside. They landed roughly on the hard, packed earth, Vaughn taking the brunt of the fall as he twisted to protect Olivia. Behind them, the cabin's roof collapsed inward with a deafening roar, sending a plume of sparks shooting skyward like a macabre celebration of their narrow escape. Gasping for clean air, Vaughn carried Olivia farther from the burning structure, not stopping until they reached his nervous horse. Only then did he gently lower her to the ground, cradling her head as he examined her for injuries. "Olivia, can you hear me?" he asked, panic rising in his throat as she remained unresponsive. Her face was smudged with soot, her breathing shallow and labored. Without hesitation, Vaughn lifted her once more and placed her on his horse before mounting behind her. With one arm securely around her waist, he guided his mount toward town, where Doc Sullivan kept his practice. The journey felt endless as Vaughn battled to keep Olivia stable in the saddle before him. Her head lolled against his chest, and he found himself whispering encouragement with each stride of the horse beneath them. "Stay with me," he pleaded, pressing his lips against her temple where her skin felt alarmingly cool despite the heat they'd just escaped. "We're almost there, Liv." The nickname slipped out unbidden, surprising him. He'd known Olivia since her return to but 3 years prior, but their interactions had been limited to polite nods when passing on the street and brief conversations at community gatherings. As Triple Creek's foreman, he had called on Mr. Appleton several times before the old man's passing, but Olivia had always kept her distance, a reserved politeness defining their acquaintance. Yet now, with her life hanging in the balance, Vaughn realized how often his gaze had followed her through town, how he'd noticed the way sunlight caught the copper highlights in her hair, how her rare smile transformed her serious face into something that made his chest tighten inexplicably. Bud appeared on the horizon, its scattered lights a welcome sight as Vaughn urged his exhausted mount down the main street toward the doctor's home. Despite the late hour, several windows still glowed with lamplight, and his shouts quickly brought curious faces to doorways. "Doc Sullivan." Vaughn called as he reined in before the physician's house. "Fire at the Appleton place. She's hurt bad," the doctor, a graying man in his 50s who had served the community for decades, emerged in his night clothes, immediately transitioning from sleep to professional efficiency. "Bring her inside," he directed, holding the door as Vaughn carried Olivia's limp form into the small examination room. "What happened?" "Cabin fire. Found her inside, barely conscious." "She's been breathing smoke for God knows how long," Vaughn explained, reluctantly relinquishing his hold on her as the doctor gestured to place her on the examination table. "Your arms need attention too," Doc Sullivan noted, glancing at Vaughn's burned and lacerated forearms before turning his full attention to Olivia. Vaughn stepped back, suddenly aware of the searing pain in his arms and shoulder where he'd broken through the wall. The adrenaline that had carried him through the rescue was fading, leaving exhaustion and worry in its wake. "Will she?" He couldn't finish the question. "I'll do everything I can," the doctor promised, already working to clear Olivia's airways. "Martha." He called to his wife, who appeared in the doorway, eyes widening at the scene before her. "Fetch clean water and bandages, and see to Mr. Mitchell's burns while I tend to Miss Appleton." The next hours passed in an agonizing blur for Vaughn. After his own wounds were cleaned and bandaged by the doctor's capable wife, he refused to leave, instead taking up vigil in a chair beside Olivia's bed once she was moved to a recovery room. Doc Sullivan had treated her smoke inhalation as best he could with the limited resources of a frontier town, applying cool compresses to her minor burns and administering a tonic to ease her breathing. "The next 24 hours will tell," the doctor had said gravely before retiring to his own quarters with instructions to be called at any change. "She's young and strong, but the lungs are delicate organs." Vaughn leaned forward in the uncomfortable wooden chair, studying Olivia's face in the soft lamplight. Without the layer of soot, her skin was pale, almost translucent, with a scattering of freckles across her nose and cheeks that he'd never noticed before. Her breathing remained shallow but had steadied somewhat, each inhale a small victory in the battle for her life. Outside, the first hints of dawn crept across the horizon, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Vaughn had sent word to his employer, Nathaniel Cooper, about the fire and his whereabouts, knowing the ranch owner would understand his absence. After all, Cooper himself had been fond of old man Appleton and had expressed concern for his daughter's welfare after his passing. Olivia stirred slightly, her brow furrowing as if in pain, and Vaughn instinctively reached for her hand. Her fingers were slender but calloused from the hard work of maintaining the homestead alone, an endeavor many in town had thought foolhardy for a woman on her own. "You're safe now," he murmured, though he wasn't sure she could hear him. "I've got you." As if in response, her fingers twitched within his grasp and her eyes fluttered open briefly before closing again. That momentary glimpse of awareness sent relief flooding through Vaughn's weary body. The door opened quietly as Martha Sullivan entered, carrying a tray with coffee and bread. "You should eat something," she said kindly, setting the tray on a small table beside him. "You've had quite a night." Vaughn nodded gratefully but made no move toward the food. "Has there been any word about the cause of the fire?" Martha sighed as she checked Olivia's forehead for fever. "Sheriff rode out at first light. Word is it doesn't look accidental kerosene splashed around the outside walls." Vaughn's jaw tightened. "Who would want to harm her?" "That's for the sheriff to determine," Martha replied diplomatically, though her expression suggested she had her suspicions. "But Miss Appleton hasn't made it easy on herself, refusing offers for her land left and right. Some men take that sort of stubbornness as a personal affront." Before Vaughn could respond, Olivia's eyes opened once more, this time remaining alert as she gazed around in confusion. "Where?" Her voice was a painful rasp, barely audible. "You're at Doc Sullivan's," Vaughn explained gently, leaning forward so she could see him without straining. "There was a fire at your place." Recognition dawned in her eyes, followed immediately by distress. "The cabin, my father's cabin, SHH, Martha soothed, placing a restraining hand on Olivia's shoulder as she attempted to sit up. "Don't try to talk too much. Your lungs need time to heal." "It's gone," Vaughn confirmed softly, still holding her hand. "I'm sorry, Olivia." Tears welled in her eyes, but she blinked them away with determined dignity. "How did I?" She gestured weakly to her surroundings. "Mr. Mitchell here pulled you from the flames," Martha explained with undisguised admiration. "Rode straight through that fire like something out of a penny novel to get you out." Olivia's gaze shifted to Vaughn, really seeing him for the first time, the singed hair at his temples, the bandages on his forearms, the exhaustion etched into his features after his sleepless vigil. "You saved me," she whispered, her fingers tightening around his. Vaughn felt heat rise to his face that had nothing to do with his burns. Anyone would have done the same, but it wasn't anyone, she insisted, her voice strengthening slightly despite its rasp. "It was you." Their eyes held for a long moment, something unspoken passing between them before Martha discreetly cleared her throat. "I'll fetch the doctor," she said, slipping from the room with a knowing smile that neither of them noticed. Left alone, Vaughn struggled to find words. 3 years of nodding politely on the street hadn't prepared him for the intensity of emotion he felt seeing Olivia awake and alive, her hand still clasped in his as if it belonged there. "Thank you," Olivia said simply, breaking the silence. "For my life." "I couldn't let you," Vaughn's voice caught unexpectedly. "When I saw the fire, all I could think was reaching you in time." Olivia attempted to shift position and winced, a small cough escaping her lips that seemed to cause considerable pain. "Easy now," Vaughn cautioned, rising to help adjust her pillows. "Doc says your lungs took quite a battering from the smoke. Everything I owned was in that cabin," she said softly after the pain subsided. "All of my father's things, his papers, his books, everything." The anguish in her voice twisted something in Vaughn's chest. "I'm sorry, Liv Miss Appleton," he corrected himself hastily. A ghost of a smile touched her lips. "Liv is fine. I think pulling someone from a burning building earns you the right to use their first name." Doc Sullivan's arrival prevented Vaughn from responding. but the small smile they shared before the doctor began his examination lingered in his mind throughout the day. Over the next week, Olivia's condition improved steadily under Doc Sullivan's care. Vaughn divided his time between his responsibilities at Triple Creek Ranch and daily visits to her bedside, bringing small comforts, wildflowers from the prairie, a book borrowed from his employer's extensive library, news from around town. Word of the fire had spread quickly through Butte, and Sheriff Wilcox confirmed what many had suspected: the blaze had been deliberately set. Kerosene had been found splashed around the foundation, and boot prints of at least 2 men had been discovered in the soft earth behind the property. "Any idea who might want to harm you, Miss Appleton?" the sheriff had asked during his official visit, his weathered face grave as he perched awkwardly on a chair beside her bed. Olivia's expression had hardened, a glimpse of steel beneath her gentle exterior. "Edgar Thornton has been trying to buy my land for months. When I refused his final offer last week, he said I'd regret being so stubborn." Vaughn, who had been present during the sheriff's questioning, felt his hands clench into fists at the mention of Thornton. The wealthy businessman had been buying up properties throughout the territory, using increasingly aggressive tactics when money alone failed to persuade. "Threatening words aren't proof," Sheriff Wilcox had said with a sigh, though he dutifully noted Olivia's statement. "But I'll have a word with Thornton and his associates." After the sheriff departed, Olivia had turned troubled eyes to Vaughn. "I have nothing left to rebuild with," she admitted quietly, "and nowhere to go once the doctor releases me." "You don't need to worry about that," Vaughn assured her without hesitation. "Mrs. Cooper has already offered you a place at the ranch until you decide what you want to do." Relief and something like pride battled in Olivia's expression. "I can't accept charity." "It's not charity to help a neighbor in need," Vaughn countered. "Besides, Mrs. Cooper mentioned needing help with the household accounts. She says her eyes aren't what they used to be for small figures." This was stretching the truth considerably. Eugenia Cooper's eyesight was perfectly sound, but the pretext would allow Olivia to earn her keep without feeling indebted. Olivia studied him for a long moment, as if trying to determine whether she was being handled. Finally, she nodded. "Please thank Mrs. Cooper for her kindness. I would be grateful for the opportunity." 2 days later, Olivia was deemed well enough to leave the doctor's care. Vaughn arrived with the Cooper's carriage, having insisted that the bumpy ride to Triple Creek Ranch would be too jarring on horseback for someone still recovering. Martha Sullivan had gathered clothing donations from several women in town, providing Olivia with a small trunk of necessities to replace what had been lost in the fire. The doctor's wife embraced Olivia warmly before helping her into the carriage. "You take care of yourself, dear," Martha instructed. "And don't let this one work too hard," she added with a meaningful glance at Vaughn that made both young people flush slightly. The journey to Triple Creek Ranch passed in comfortable conversation, with Vaughn pointing out landmarks along the way and Olivia asking thoughtful questions about the operation of the ranch. As they approached the sprawling main house, Olivia fell silent, taking in the prosperity evident in the well-maintained buildings and extensive pastures. "It's beautiful," she remarked as Vaughn helped her down from the carriage, his hands lingering at her waist perhaps a moment longer than strictly necessary. "The Coopers have built something special here," he agreed, offering his arm as they walked toward the house. "Mr. Cooper started with just 20 acres and a handful of cattle after the war. Now Triple Creek is one of the largest operations in the territory." Eugenia Cooper greeted them at the door, her silver-streaked dark hair pulled into an elegant knot, her manner warm but dignified. At 50, she carried herself with the confidence of a woman who had helped build an empire from nothing. "Miss Appleton, welcome to our home," she said, taking Olivia's hands in her own. "We're so pleased you've agreed to stay with us while you recover. Thank you for your generosity, Mrs. Cooper," Olivia responded with genuine gratitude. "I hope I can be of service during my stay." "We'll discuss all that tomorrow," Eugenia declared, linking her arm through Olivia's. For now, you must rest. Vaughn, have Rosa bring tea to the blue room once Miss Appleton is settled." Vaughn watched with undisguised affection as his employer's wife led Olivia up the grand staircase, already chatting about the view from the guest room and the dinner menu for the evening. Mrs. Cooper had never had children of her own, and her motherly instincts often extended to those in need throughout the community. "She'll be in good hands," came a deep voice behind him, and Vaughn turned to find Nathaniel Cooper emerging from his study. The ranch owner was a tall man with a full beard now more gray than brown, his eyes shrewd but kind beneath bushy brows. "Yes, sir," Vaughn agreed, removing his hat in respect. "Terrible business about the fire," Cooper continued, gesturing Vaughn into the study. "Sheriff stopped by yesterday. Says he suspects Thornton but can't prove anything." "It was Thornton," Vaughn stated with certainty, accepting the glass of whiskey his employer offered. "He's been after the Appleton property for months." Cooper nodded slowly, settling into his leather chair with a thoughtful expression. "The Appleton land controls access to Fuller Creek. With water rights becoming what they are, that makes it valuable indeed." "Valuable enough to murder for?" Vaughn asked, the glass in his hand forgotten as anger rose within him at the thought of how close Olivia had come to death. "To some men," Cooper replied gravely. "The territory is changing, Vaughn. The days when a handshake sealed a deal are fading. Men like Thornton represent a new approach, one that values profit above honor." They discussed ranch business for another hour, but Vaughn found his thoughts repeatedly drifting to Olivia, wondering how she was settling in, if she was comfortable, if the events of the past week were weighing on her mind. That evening, dinner was served in the formal dining room, a rare occurrence typically reserved for special occasions. Olivia appeared wearing a borrowed dress of pale blue cotton that complemented her copper hair, which had been styled simply but elegantly by Eugenia's maid. Though still pale from her ordeal, with faint shadows beneath her eyes testifying to her ongoing recovery, she carried herself with quiet dignity that struck Vaughn anew. Conversation flowed easily throughout the meal, with Nathaniel Cooper sharing amusing stories from the early days of the ranch and Eugenia inquiring delicately about Olivia's education and interests. Vaughn found himself watching Olivia more than participating, noticing the way her face animated when discussing books she had enjoyed, and how her eyes brightened when Mrs. Cooper mentioned the ranch's extensive library. "Vaughn tells us you kept your father's accounts after his passing," Cooper remarked as dessert was served. "That shows a head for figures not common among young ladies." "My father believed education shouldn't be limited by gender," Olivia replied with a small smile of remembrance. "He taught me mathematics alongside literature and history." "A progressive thinker," Cooper approved, "and that skill will serve you well. Eugenia mentioned our need for assistance with the household accounts, but I confess we have a greater need in the ranch office. Our previous bookkeeper left for California last month, and the ledgers have fallen into disarray." Olivia straightened, interest clear in her expression. "Are you offering me employment, Mr. Cooper?" "I am indeed, Miss Appleton." "A fair wage and continued lodging here until you decide your next steps." Cooper glanced at his wife, who nodded encouragement. "The position is yours if you want it." "I would be honored," Olivia accepted without hesitation, relief washing over her features. "Thank you for this opportunity." Later, as twilight settled over the ranch, Vaughn found Olivia on the wide veranda, wrapped in a shawl against the evening chill as she gazed out over the landscape. "May I join you?" he asked, remaining at a respectful distance. Olivia turned with a smile that made his heart skip. "Of course." Vaughn moved to stand beside her at the railing, close enough to sense her presence without impropriety. "How are you finding Triple Creek?" "It's more than I could have hoped for," she admitted, her voice soft in the gathering darkness. "The Coopers are extraordinarily kind." "They're good people," Vaughn agreed. "They gave me a chance when I had nothing, much as they're doing for you now." Olivia studied him curiously. "I know little about you beyond your position here, Mr. Mitchell." "Vaughn," he corrected gently, "and there's not much to tell." I came west after the war with nothing but the clothes on my back and nightmares that wouldn't quit. Worked my way through a half-dozen ranches before landing here 5 years ago. The war changed many men, Olivia observed, compassion in her gaze. For better or worse, Vaughn agreed, unconsciously flexing his left hand, where a long-healed bullet wound sometimes ached in cold weather. Cooper saw something worth salvaging in me when others didn't, taught me ranching from the ground up, and eventually made me foreman. They stood in companionable silence for several minutes, watching as stars appeared one by one in the darkening sky. The air between them felt charged somehow, alive with possibility neither was quite ready to acknowledge. "I never properly thanked you," Olivia said finally, turning to face him. In the fading light, her eyes appeared almost golden, flecked with amber. "Not just for saving my life, but for everything since." "No thanks needed," Vaughn insisted, though her gratitude warmed him. "Anyone would have—" "No," she interrupted firmly. "Not anyone would have risked their life charging into that inferno. Not anyone would have stayed by my bedside or arranged for shelter and employment. You did those things, Vaughn Mitchell, and I won't have you diminish them." Surprised by her vehemence, Vaughn found himself at a loss for words. In the quiet that followed her declaration, something shifted between them, an acknowledgement of connection beyond mere circumstance. Before either could speak further, the ranch foreman was summoned by a ranch hand with news of a problem at the south pasture. Vaughn departed reluctantly, but not before Olivia's hand brushed his arm in a touch too deliberate to be accidental. "Good night, Vaughn," she said softly, the sound of his name on her lips sending a pleasant shiver down his spine. "Good night, Liv," he responded, tipping his hat before descending the veranda steps, certain that whatever lay ahead, nothing would be quite the same after tonight. The following weeks established a new rhythm at Triple Creek Ranch. Olivia proved herself exceptionally capable with the ranch accounts, bringing order to the chaotic ledgers within days of assuming her position. She worked primarily from a small office adjacent to Cooper's study, occasionally consulting with Vaughn on matters relating to cattle sales or supply purchases. These professional interactions provided opportunities for their growing friendship to deepen, though both maintained a careful propriety in the presence of others. It was in the quiet moments, an exchanged glance across the dinner table, a private conversation on the veranda in the evening, the occasional shared ride to check fence lines, that something more profound began to take root. Olivia blossomed in the supportive environment of Triple Creek. Color returned to her cheeks, and the lingering cough from smoke inhalation gradually faded. She formed a close bond with Eugenia Cooper, who delighted in having another woman in the household after years surrounded primarily by cowboys and ranch hands. For his part, Vaughn found himself inventing reasons to visit the main house more frequently than his duties strictly required. He took particular pleasure in bringing Olivia news from town or small gifts, a ribbon for her hair purchased on a supply run, wildflowers gathered from the pasture, a book of poetry he'd found in a shop in Butte. One crisp October afternoon, as autumn painted the landscape in golds and reds, Vaughn sought out Olivia with news from Sheriff Wilcox. He found her in the garden behind the main house, helping Rosa, the Cooper's Mexican cook, harvest the last of the season's vegetables. The sight of her kneeling beside a row of carrots, her copper hair escaping its pins to curl around her face, her borrowed work dress smudged with soil, struck Vaughn with an unexpected force that momentarily robbed him of speech. In that ordinary moment, he recognized the truth he'd been avoiding for weeks. He was falling in love with Olivia Appleton. "Vaughn," her voice broke through his reverie as she noticed him standing at the garden gate. "Is everything all right?" Collecting himself, he nodded, opening the gate to join her. "Sheriff Wilcox sent word. They've arrested one of Thornton's men for the fire." Olivia straightened, brushing soil from her hands as her expression grew serious. "Which one?" "Fella named Dirk Simmons. Got drunk at the saloon last night and started bragging about setting a fire that would teach a stubborn woman a lesson. Deputy was there and heard the whole thing." Relief washed over Olivia's features. "And Thornton? denies all knowledge, claims Simmons acted alone. Vaughn's tone made clear his skepticism. But the sheriff's watching him closely now. Word is Thornton's backing off land acquisitions for the time being too much scrutiny. Rosa, sensing the private nature of their conversation, discreetly gathered her basket of vegetables and made her way back to the kitchen, leaving them alone among the autumn garden beds. "That's something, at least," Olivia said, absently tucking a strand of hair behind her ear, leaving a smudge of dirt on her cheek that Vaughn found inexplicably endearing. "You have." He gestured to her face. "Oh," she rubbed at her cheek, managing only to spread the smudge further. Without thinking, Vaughn reached out, gently wiping away the soil with his thumb. The contact lingered, his hand cupping her cheek longer than necessary as their eyes met and held. "There," he said softly, his voice rougher than he intended. Neither moved for a long moment, the air between them charged with unspoken feelings. Then, gathering his courage, Vaughn took a step closer. "Liv, I've been wanting to ask if you might—" "Vaughn." Cooper's voice rang out from the direction of the stables, breaking the moment. "Need you to look at that new stallion. Something's not right with his gait." With a rueful smile, Vaughn stepped back. "Duty calls." "Yes," Olivia agreed, a hint of disappointment in her voice that gave him hope. "We can talk later, count on it," he promised before reluctantly departing. Later proved elusive, however, as a series of ranch emergencies kept Vaughn occupied well into the evening. By the time he returned to the main house, exhausted and mud splattered from helping birth a difficult calf, the household had retired for the night. The following morning brought unexpected news that pushed personal matters temporarily aside. Edgar Thornton had filed a legal claim against Olivia for the Appleton property, asserting that her father had signed an agreement to sell before his death. "It's an outright lie," Olivia declared, her hands trembling with anger as she read the legal notice delivered by the sheriff. The Cooper family and Vaughn had gathered in the study upon hearing of the sheriff's arrival. "My father would never have agreed to sell our land, especially not to Thornton." "The document appears legitimate," Sheriff Wilcox said apologetically. "Has Thornton's signature and what purports to be your father's. Court date set for 2 weeks from now in the territorial capital." "This is his revenge for Simmons' arrest," Vaughn stated flatly. "He can't intimidate Olivia with fire, so now he's trying the courts." "We'll fight this," Cooper declared, his weathered face set with determination. "My lawyer in Prescott is the best in the territory. We'll contest the signature, demand handwriting experts." Olivia's expression reflected both gratitude and concern. "Mr. Cooper, I can't ask you to take on this burden. You've already done so much nonsense," Eugenia interrupted firmly. "We stand by our own, my dear, and you're one of us now." The declaration brought unexpected tears to Olivia's eyes, and Vaughn fought the urge to take her hand in comfort, aware of the propriety required in the presence of others. The following fortnight passed in a flurry of legal preparations. Cooper's lawyer, Abraham Goldstein, arrived from Prescott with an investigator in tow, gathering evidence and taking statements from townspeople who had known Jacob Appleton. Throughout it all, Olivia maintained her composure, though Vaughn often found her in the library late at night, poring over her father's remaining papers salvaged from the bank's vault, searching for anything that might help their case. On one such evening, a week before the court date, Vaughn entered the library with 2 cups of coffee to find Olivia asleep at the desk, her head resting on a pile of documents, her face finally peaceful after days of worry. Setting the cups down quietly, he debated whether to wake her. The lamplight caught the copper highlights in her hair, creating a halo effect that made his breath catch. In sleep, the determined set of her jaw relaxed, revealing a vulnerability she rarely allowed others to see. As if sensing his presence, Olivia stirred, her eyes opening slowly to find him watching her. "Vaughn," she murmured, sitting up and brushing her hair back self-consciously. "What time is it?" "Past midnight," he replied, sliding one of the coffee cups toward her. "Thought you might need this." "Thank you," she said gratefully, warming her hands around the cup. "I must have dozed off while reviewing these bank statements." Vaughn took the seat across from her. "Any luck finding what you need?" Nothing conclusive, she admitted with a sigh, but I know my father never intended to sell. This land was everything to him, to us. After my mother died, he poured his heart into making it a viable homestead. I believe you, Vaughn said simply, and so will the judge. Olivia studied him over the rim of her cup, her gaze thoughtful. How can you be so certain? Thornton has money influence, a document with what appears to be my father's signature. Because I know you, Vaughn replied with quiet conviction, and I'm learning that in this life there are people whose word stands against any paper document. Your father was such a man, by all accounts. And you are cut from the same cloth. The compliment brought a soft smile to Olivia's lips. You have remarkable faith, Mr. Mitchell. In some things, he acknowledged, holding her gaze, in some people. The air between them grew charged once more, the late hour and solitude of the library removing the usual barriers of propriety. Vaughn leaned forward slightly, his hand moving across the desk until his fingers rested inches from hers. Liv, when this court business is settled, there's something I've been meaning to ask you. Her breath caught audibly, her own fingers inching closer to his. Yes. I've never been a man of many words, he began, uncharacteristically hesitant. But these past weeks, getting to know you better, I've come to feel the library door opened abruptly as Nathaniel Cooper entered, spectacles perched on his nose and a telegraph in his hand. Vaughn and Olivia drew back from each other hastily, though the knowing look in Cooper's eye suggested he had interrupted something significant. Pardon the intrusion at this late hour, Cooper said, suppressing a smile, but I've just received news from Goldstein that couldn't wait until morning. Olivia straightened, professional decorum replacing the intimate atmosphere of moments before. News about my case, indeed. Cooper handed her the telegraph. They've found the man who witnessed the supposed sale agreement, a drifter named Jenkins who worked briefly for Thornton last spring. Goldstein's investigator tracked him to a mining camp near Flagstaff. Olivia scanned the telegraph quickly. He's willing to testify that Thornton paid him to forge my father's signature for a price, Cooper confirmed with a grimace, but it's worth it to expose Thornton's scheme. Goldstein believes with this testimony, the case will be dismissed without even going to trial. Relief washed over Olivia's features, and without thinking, she reached for Vaughn's hand across the desk. He took it readily, giving her fingers a reassuring squeeze. Thank you, she said to Cooper, her voice thick with emotion. I don't know how I'll ever repay your kindness. See that ranch of yours prospering again, Cooper replied simply. That'll be payment enough. With a nod to them both, he withdrew, closing the library door behind him. Alone once more, Vaughn became acutely aware that Olivia's hand remained in his, their fingers now intertwined naturally. It seems congratulations are in order, he said softly. You'll have your land back. Land with nothing on it, she reminded him, though her tone was more thoughtful than despairing. Everything's gone, the cabin, the barn, the tools. Not everything, Vaughn countered. The land itself remains, the soil, the trees, the creek, and your determination. Olivia's thumb traced small circles on the back of his hand, sending pleasant shivers up his arm. I've been thinking about that, about what comes next. And what have you decided? She met his gaze directly, a new confidence in her expression. That rebuilding alone would be impossible. But perhaps, with the right partner, it could become something even better than before. The implication of her words hung in the air between them, an invitation Vaughn had scarcely dared hope for. Rising from his chair, still holding her hand, he moved around the desk until he stood beside her. Liv, he said, his voice low and earnest as she stood to face him. I'm not a wealthy man. I've saved some from my wages, enough to help rebuild a cabin, maybe add a proper barn. But what I'm offering isn't financial, it's a promise to stand beside you through whatever comes, to build a life together if you'll have me. Are you proposing, Vaughn Mitchell? Olivia asked, her voice steady despite the flush spreading across her cheeks. Inelegantly, perhaps, he admitted with a self-deprecating smile, but with my whole heart. In answer, Olivia closed the small distance between them, her free hand coming to rest against his chest. Then yes, she whispered, her eyes bright with unshed tears of joy. Yes, I will have you. With reverent care, Vaughn cupped her face in his hands, searching her eyes for any doubt and finding none. Slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, he lowered his lips to hers in a first kiss that began tenderly but quickly deepened as years of loneliness on both sides gave way to the promise of a shared future. When they finally parted, breathless and smiling, Vaughn kept her close, his forehead resting against hers. "I've wanted to do that since I carried you from that burning cabin," he confessed. "I'm glad you waited until I was conscious enough to remember it properly," Olivia teased, bringing a low laugh from him that she felt rather than heard. The court case was indeed dismissed before trial, as Cooper's lawyer had predicted. Edgar Thornton, facing potential charges of fraud and possible connection to arson, abruptly sold his holdings in the territory and departed for California, leaving Olivia's claim to her land uncontested. Their engagement was announced formally at Sunday services in Butte, to the delight of the community who had followed their story from the dramatic rescue to the courtroom victory. Martha Sullivan took particular pride in having predicted the match from the beginning, telling anyone who would listen that she had seen the devotion in Vaughn's eyes during those long hours at Olivia's bedside. Cooper surprised the couple with a wedding gift of 20 head of cattle and 2 sturdy plow horses to begin their herd. Eugenia contributed household necessities and fine linens she had ordered specially from San Francisco. The community of Butte, touched by their story and pleased to see Thornton's schemes thwarted, organized a barn raising on the Appleton property, with men from miles around contributing labor and materials. By spring of 1886, a new cabin stood on the foundation of the old larger and sturdier, with proper glass windows and a stone fireplace that Vaughn insisted would keep Olivia warm through the winter months. Beside it rose a small barn and corral, ready for the livestock that would form the beginnings of their ranch. They were married on a perfect May morning beneath the spreading branches of an old oak tree that had survived the fire. Olivia wore a dress of ivory silk that Eugenia had helped design, with sprigs of wildflowers in her copper hair. Vaughn, unrecognizable from the soot-covered rescuer of months before, stood tall in a new suit, his eyes never leaving his bride as they spoke their vows before the assembled community. "You may kiss your bride," the minister announced at the conclusion of the ceremony, and amid cheers and applause, Vaughn gathered Olivia into his arms, sealing their union with a kiss that promised a lifetime of love and partnership. The celebration continued well into the evening, with tables set up in the yard of their new home, lanterns hanging from tree branches, and music provided by local musicians. As twilight fell, Vaughn found Olivia standing apart from the festivities, gazing at the spot where she had nearly lost her life. "Having second thoughts, Mrs. Mitchell?" he asked softly, coming to stand behind her, his arms encircling her waist. "Never," she assured him, leaning back against his chest. "Just thinking about how strangely life unfolds. If not for that fire, as terrible as it was, we might never have found each other, not truly." "I'd have found you eventually," Vaughn murmured against her hair. "Some things are meant to be, fire or no fire." Olivia turned in his embrace to face him, her expression serious despite the joy of the day. "Promise me something, anything." "No more running into burning buildings," she said, only half joking as her fingers traced the faint scar on his forearm, a permanent reminder of that night. "Unless you're in one," he countered, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "Vaughn Mitchell, you are impossibly stubborn," she sighed, though her eyes shone with love. "A perfect match for you then, Olivia Mitchell," he replied, drawing her close once more as the music from their wedding celebration drifted on the evening breeze. The years that followed brought challenges and triumphs in equal measure. The small herd of cattle grew steadily under Vaughn's careful management, while Olivia applied her head for figures to developing additional income streams, a vegetative garden that supplied the growing town of Butte, beehives that produced honey sought after throughout the territory, and careful investments that multiplied their modest savings. Their first child, a son they named Jacob Nathaniel after both their fathers, arrived in the spring of 1887, with Eugenia Cooper serving as midwife. A daughter, Margaret Rose, followed 2 years later, her copper hair marking her unmistakably as Olivia's child, though her eyes were Vaughn's clear blue. By 1895, the Mitchell Ranch, as the former Appleton property came to be known, had expanded to include neighboring parcels as other homesteaders moved west. Their herd numbered over 200 head, and the original cabin had been expanded to a comfortable home that often served as a gathering place for community celebrations. On the 10th anniversary of the fire that had nearly claimed Olivia's life, the Mitchells hosted a harvest celebration for the entire community. As evening fell and neighbors departed for their own homes, Vaughn found his wife sitting on the porch swing, watching their children playing with the Cooper grandchildren in the yard. Happy? He asked, settling beside her and taking her hand, a gesture that had become as natural as breathing over their years together. Completely, Olivia confirmed, leaning her head against his shoulder. At 32, her beauty had matured, the girl he had carried from flames now a confident woman, respected throughout the territory for her business acumen and unwavering integrity. "You know, I still remember the first moment I saw you clearly after pulling you from that cabin," Vaughn mused, his arm around her shoulders. "You looked up at me, and even half-conscious, there was such strength in your eyes. I think I started falling for you right then. And I remember waking in Doc Sullivan's to find you holding my hand," Olivia replied, smiling at the memory. "You looked terrible, singed hair, bloodshot eyes from the smoke, bandages everywhere. I thought you were the most handsome man I'd ever seen." Vaughn laughed, the sound rich with contentment. "We've come a fair piece from those days. And we have further yet to go," she reminded him, her hand coming to rest on her middle in a gesture that made his eyes widen with sudden understanding. "Liv, are you saying?" Her smile was radiant in the fading light. "Dr. Williams confirmed it yesterday. Come spring, there will be another Mitchell in this house." Joy surged through Vaughn as he gathered his wife close, his kiss conveying what words could not: gratitude for the life they had built, for the family they had created, for the love that had begun in the most desperate of circumstances and grown into something enduring and beautiful. "I love you, Olivia Mitchell," he whispered against her lips, "from flames to forever." "And I love you," she returned, her arms around his neck as their children's laughter filled the twilight air. "My cowboy, my hero, my heart." Above them, the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, bearing witness to a love that had risen from the ashes of tragedy to build something stronger and more enduring than either could have imagined on that fateful night 10 years before, a testament to courage, to faith, and to the transformative power of love in the untamed heart of the Arizona Territory.